Welcome back to the channel. So today we're going to have a look at weathering a small 4BO tank. That's the paint colour of this Russian tank, and we're just going to weather it up in a basic way using some simple techniques and try and get an attractive result. So the important thing that you can see here in the picture is I'm using two chipping colours. So it's chipping from MIG, which is number 44, and also the German black brown, which is from Vallejo, which is also listed as ROM 61, kind of like a chocolate colour. And what I'm doing here is just going around hatches with a bit of this acrylic paint, not thinned, and just picking out some areas where it's going to be open, closed, so to get a bit of chipping around the edges. And that gives a reasonably effective result. Now, the colour is important. This chipping colour generally works for everything. Doesn't show up that well on this green, but it does work. It's okay. And then we go around some of the other access points. And this is what you would look at. It's mainly doors, edges, any scratches, that sort of thing. That's what we're adding here with this paint colour. You just need to think about where it would be done, not just put it everywhere. Like around the edge of this, for instance, where this is being painted white, this being a finish tank and a captured tank, so it's probably been around a bit. You've got to just think about where it would get caught quite easily by getting on and off the tank, which is what I'm doing here. And less is more. You cannot have too small a chip, so just build it up in very small brush marks in sensible areas, and then you can go back. So I'm using both colours here, although I don't separate them, and the good thing about acrylic is if you get it wrong, you just wipe it off before it dries. So the darker one, I actually prefer the Vallejo German black brown. I think is a better colour than the Ammo chipping colour, and it also performs a little bit better because it's a thicker paint, so it doesn't dry out so quick. But the two work very well together. You can pick out any high points as well, like these bolts and those sort of edges, and just move around to the front now. Catch a bit of that down there. As you can see, I've got a bit heavy. I finished that off camera. And now we're going to put some scratches on the side here. Now, this is an amphibious tank. I've had a lot of ideas with this as to whether, you know, I could do it as a water diorama, have it coming just out of water and make it look really wet, but it would be clean, but everything would be really wet. But in the end, I thought we'd go down the traditional route. I've got another one of these anyway. It's a great little kit from HobbyBoss. You can do a lot with it. So there you see the scratches on the side. These are side fenders, but they're also like the floats. So they're quite unusual, quite chunky. Now I've gone over with some acrylic. So from Tamiya, it's XF13, which is a sort of off green colour, and that's very useful. So you can go over and make flicks and flecks. You can make flecks all the way around. You can see where I'm catching it in the light, and you just put them as marks all over the place, as a kind of, not as a chip, more as a sort of wear area, patina, I suppose. And you can see how effective it is for adding just a bit of interest. As you can see across the front plate there. And that's always just a variant of the base colour. You wouldn't go back on with the base colour. You always use a slightly different tone, then it shows up. And that now completes the chipping. So you just go over, as you can see. This is all with a brush, not with sponge technique or anything like that. And that has created a bit of interest for us. And that's all we're trying to do. This is a kind of plain palette, if you like. And we have to add stuff to it to make it look interesting. So that's the initial stage. This is how I'm sort of doing it as we go through. You go through with a pass of chipping, and it already starts to tell you the story of where you're going. So then using an ammo wash, so this is the dark brown wash for green vehicles. I like the ammo stuff. Doesn't replace oils. It's just a different thing. And this time we're using enamel washes, but I find them very useful as a convenience thing, really. And what they were going to do here is a pin wash. Now, what I've noticed with a lot of demonstrations of pin washes, they don't tell you to go round and take it off. They say we put a pin wash on and do it all neat, and you do it, and you think, I don't know how on earth that's happened. Well, that's because the trick is you put it on as neat as you can be, but once it's dry, you take it off again from all the areas. Now, I found this very difficult doing this on camera, so I couldn't be as neat as I'd like to be. That's why that's splodged on a bit. But that's fine. We come back and knock that off. So the idea of a pin wash is to pick all the high points. So any recess panel lines, it's a panel line wash really, if you're an aircraft. So any recesses, any raised detail, any raised bolts, any so around the base of the gun there, for instance, all of that, you go in with this darker wash, and it gives this effect. As you can see, everything starts to pop, but it's a little bit messy. There's areas where it's splodged out. So once it's dried, and this is important, you have to let it dry, otherwise if you do it when it's wet, you'll move it around again. You then come back and take it off. So whilst we're letting that dry, we're going to move down onto the tracks. And for that, we've got wet mud, which is an interesting product. Again, thinking about, the idea for this is I wanted some dark, soily texture to the running gear, and I wanted it to look like it was wet and drying off. So I wondered how we could do that. So first off, I went on with this wet mud product from Ammo. This is an enamel product. Now this did stay tacky for a long time, as you would expect, but it did go off eventually. And the best tip I can give you, I mentioned it in the Spitfire video back along, is get a hairdryer, because you can use a hairdryer to knock all this back, and it makes it start to dry very quickly. You speed up the process. This whole video that you're watching, this was done in one sequence in about 2 hours. Now, this isn't the best model I've ever done, and I didn't finish off the details. There's lights to paint, picking out the silver on the tracks, all that sort of thing. But as far as the weathering's concerned, it's not a process I tend to enjoy. So for me, I've needed to find a way to get through it and find enjoyment for it. And where I like to build quite a lot of vehicles, this has worked very well for me. This gets me through the weathering process, and I find once I'm in it, I tend to enjoy it, and then I tend to spend a bit more time. But if I'm going into it thinking it's going to take me 3 weeks to weather this model, I sort of keep putting it off. So that's what I'm trying to do. And we've got a range of videos coming out now that are going to help show you that. So this, as much as this looks like it's slavering it on, it's not. It's doing it with the knowledge that we're going to take it off again, it being enamel. So obviously where it's all splodged on all around the tyres, now I'm going on with neat thinners, and I'm knocking it back off of where the tyre meets the track, any wear points, anywhere I want to clean up where I think it's too heavy. So don't worry, everything, it's always a fluid thing. Think of it like a painting. It's never finished sort of thing. You're always changing things. This is what you should do with weathering. You should always be sort of willing to adapt and change things and take a bit off or add a bit more on until you're happy. Let it tell its story. That's what I like to do. So now continuing with that, we've got that wet mud on, so we're going to go on now with a track wash, which I find very useful. This is again straight from Ammo, and this is, as it says on the tin, it's a track wash. So we go over the tracks and we give it a wash. And what that does, once it sits in quite heavy, it settles into the recesses, so it's quite nice. So now that's all done. Now the tracks are drying. We go back up top, neat thinners, and we're just going to go in and try and knock all of this pin wash back in around the recesses. And that is with, as much as it looks like a wet brush, it's almost a dry brush. The thinners are on there, but they've been really knocked off. And you're just using it to give it a bit of bite to move some of the dried enamel. And this is where the hairdryer comes in, because then when you're at this point with its sort of staining, tide marks, you hit it with the hairdryer and it all goes away. So you can see what you've got, and then you're left with something like this. Much cleaner looking, much nicer, much more sort of in line with what we expect and going in the direction that we want. You can see the chipping working there as well. Everything's starting to come together and tell the story, which is what we're trying to do. Weathering is telling a story. You're meant to look at weathering of a vehicle, and if it's done effectively, it should instantly tell you the kind of area that vehicle's been in, the kind of life it's had, what it's done. It makes it look interesting. So there we go, reasonably happy with that. The pin wash is now where it needs to be. So now we're going to go in with Starship wash. And this is more as a, not a pin wash. Again, we get caught in terminology. You don't need the term really. This is just going in to darken and deepen areas. So the Starship products are really good. There's a couple of companies that have got them. Ammo's got Starship wash, Starship grime. It's got it in the oil brusher as well. It's just that perfect colour. It's the right tones. It's a bit of green, bit of brown, bit of grey, and it just gives you that instant kind of depth and dirty deposit look. So that's what we're doing with that. We're going round now into the deeper areas, picking out a few more rivets that we want, so they get a bit. It's so obviously some are darker than others. Now we've got the streaking. Once that's gone around, obviously being a very small tank, we can get away with things rather quickly. So for the streaking, we just go along an area where we want streaking. And we're not trying to streak it with the brush, we're trying to put it where we want it. Then we go in with a wide brush, we just pull it down. This is dry, has to be dry, the brush. And you just pull it down, 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 and you get this wonderful, subtle streaking. So you can do this with one colour, then you go in with another colour and almost do it at the lower end and streak it up. It's fantastic. Now this is something I've stumbled on. I'm going to work on a bit more. So this is using the streaking grime again. Not streaking grime, Starship streaking. And I'm just putting it on, as you can see, in kind of heavy blobs in areas. And then I stipple it in. And it gives this really kind of worn and used and kind of dirty look. And I quite like it. So I'm going to try and work on that a bit more. Because at the minute it's doing something I don't understand, and it's doing something that's there that doesn't really tell a story, if that makes sense. But I think if I work at it for a bit, we might get somewhere with that. So streaking rust effects, just again stippled onto an already painted muffler. So this is painted in a kind of rusty colour. And now this cuts through with a lighter colour, which shows the dark colour coming through in the stippling effect. And it's just a very easy and basic way to give a nice looking exhaust. And you'll start to see that everything we add starts to add another layer, and we get closer and closer to the finish line. And that's the important thing about this, is to try and get through it. So we're back down now onto the running gear, and I'm going to use some pigments now, winter soil. I usually use the lighter pigments, but like I said, we wanted a darker look. I want that grimy kind of midwinter up in Finland. I just imagine it's sort of blackish soil, it's churning it up, it's going through it. That's what I'm looking for, and that's I do feel as though I get that effect, and I do quite like it. So this pigment now is keeping it on the lower end of the vehicle and fading it up into that wet effect, in the hope that wet effect bleeds through the dry pigment, which it does. And I'm reasonably hopeful for, but we have to make that work. It won't just do that from being like this. So once the pigment is put on, I just go on with the thinners that I've been using to wash out the brush, really, with the rest of the earth-coloured shades that I've been using. And we're just kicking it up and connecting this dry pigment up to the wet area, so in the hope that it blends back through. And that's what it does. It's also using the thinners as a pigment fixer as well. And this just shows you how it looks when it's dry. You see you've got the wet effect higher up and it's drying lower down. Idea being, if you think about it, it's gone through some very wet soil, then it's gone up onto a dry track. So the first area that's going to dry is from the lower base up, not from the uppers down. That's the concept. Now we've got this turned earth product, and we're getting right into the end now. We're just using that to show a bit more of a diversity in the soil colour. As you can see, again, now doing the streaking in the opposite way and fading it up like mud flicks. And we go on with the turned earth onto the tracks in a kind of heavy way, and then we go back and thin that down with neat thinners as well again. Now those splodges on the side, a bit heavy, but then you've got to think, when you look at vehicles, you think, well, actually, sometimes it does get hit. So, don't be worried about leaving certain things. And this light soil gives a nice contrast to the darker soil, and it does then blend in as well. It looks instantly like it's the wrong colour, but as it dries and it fades down, it does look it looks okay, like it's gone through a bit of clay. You know, this happens. Soil's always different. Ask me how I know. So the thinners go on through the tracks to blend in that turned earth, and that gets us to where we want to be. So hopefully that is of use. Now that is trying to show something that is some very basic, simple techniques to get through weathering quickly. Now speed isn't everything, but sometimes not everyone wants to spend a long time on a model, and it can be quite daunting. So just with a few simple techniques and a few easy to get products, this has got us to the point of finishing this model to a reasonable standard. It's not an award winner, it doesn't need to be, but it looks great when it goes into the cabinet, and it's kept us working on some of those techniques. It's got those skills back in muscle memory, all of that, because it's very easy if you take sort of, 3 to 6 months building a model and you only weather it for 3 weeks, it's very easy to lose these techniques. So it's important to try and keep everything moving and add new stuff. Now I think this is okay, and we're going to perfect this, take it a bit, one step on now. I say perfect it, I shouldn't say that word, but we're going to keep developing as we go through and try and add more and more interesting techniques and try and get ourselves to a reasonable standard without making things too complex. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Thanks for staying tuned as always. This is continuing on our basic armor modeling series, which is always being updated on the channel. So if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. If you like what you see, give us a thumbs up and let me know your comments down below. Is weathering your favourite part, or do you struggle with it? Most people seem to really enjoy the weathering process. I don't. I do struggle with it. It's the one thing that causes me issues. But nevertheless, instead of sitting there and worrying about it, we're going to take it head on. So again, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.